Patch 7.4 is out now, and it brings with it a number of job changes that are actually fairly consequential to the way that a number of the retinue actually play. While some are just shifts in pure numbers with nothing more of substance, others are actually quite interesting. This is the patch of quality of life after all. We got glamour restrictions lifted, bulk repair on everything, and the strategy planner. It only makes sense that the jobs would be recipient to something similar too. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look through the job changes, discussing which received buffs, nerfs, or the dreaded stealth nerf, and cover how this will affect their playstyle, and if these alterations are helping the job landscape of the game to trend in a positive direction. As a side note, please do consider subscribing if conversations about FF14 are your thing, I really do appreciate it. So Dark Knight has received one small change for one big reason. Living Shadow has been extended in duration from 20 seconds to 22. Rather than being a balance shift or a numbers tuning, this is a quality of life fix to a janky old issue that the job had. A holdover from the days of Summoner with Bahamut auto attacks that dates all the way back to Stormblood. So Esteem will let out a set number of attacks during his window, and at the end of the window is the big hit, Disesteem, with huge bang for your buck in potency. But sometimes, if you have to move the boss around a lot whilst Esteem is active, he can pause his attack animations to move. Doing this too much can delay this Disesteem so long that you end up just not getting it at all, as he despawns before it can activate. This 2-second extension aims to fix that. This isn't an overall potency change and will honestly likely come as a surprise to many players in the first place. I don't think the overwhelming majority of Dark Knight players are paying attention to whether their Esteem gets all his damage numbers or not, but it's a nice little fix to an annoying and obfuscated little problem. I count that as a win, personally. Now, Gunbreaker got changes too, being the only other tank to receive any. Paladin and Warrior are the same as ever, but Gunbreaker's changes are big, actually. Now, instead of being able to maintain a maximum of 3 charges, you can take 6. And in service of this newly raised ammo cap, the cooldown of Bloodfest has been reduced to 60 seconds, greatly expediting your cartridge economy. You can blast more and faster, and are no longer punished by the constraints of downtime in the same way you were before patch 7.4. One recurring complaint players have voiced about the job is its difficulty in moving the boss during burst windows, specifically the awkwardness of disengaging with Gnashing Fang. Small changes were made earlier, with the range being increased slightly, and the second step comes today in adding a charge system to Gnashing Fang itself. This means that instead of needing to dip back in at least once every GCD at the whim of your rotation, you have much more control over when you enter those windows, making positioning the boss quickly much more comfortable and easy to do, and it also enables some small optimization avenues. Because Gunbreaker is about to spend so much more time bursting their gauge skills, damage values had to be altered to prevent it snowballing the roll and becoming an unstoppable force. Double Down has been reverted in cost to 2 cartridges instead of 1, and potencies across the board have been shifted downwards slightly to accommodate. It resulted in a roughly 1% damage nerf on single target for the job. Gunbreaker has become easier to play this patch, and for those that held large reservations about its dawntrail iteration, that will come as good news. But for those that may be enjoyers of its current state, they could find themselves disappointed that the edges have been sheared off in favour of comfortability. Gauge management has been reduced, though my understanding is that it wasn't particularly interesting to do in the first place on the job. You can argue with me in the comment section about that if you want, but I'm not a huge Gunbreaker player, so I can't say either way with any level of conviction. Ninja received a tiny weeny change that does have a knock-on effect for their rotation. Goka Mecha Q, which I probably pronounced bloody terribly, has been buffed in potency, their fire AoE special boy Mudra. This results in it being a DPS gain for them to use in 2 target scenarios over Hyosho, and is likely being added to the game as a direct result of M10S and its fight design. That battle has extended 2 target phases where both bosses are attackable, and there's no weird firewall shenanigans that prevent you from effectively hitting both. So Square Enix have likely been looking at AoE balance and trying to ensure there's some level of equality amongst the role. I expect it's getting ahead of any balancing concerns Savage may have when it releases in a few weeks' time. On that note, Viper got a big nerf to their AoE as well. The single target damage is entirely unaffected, but Viper was really strong in M6S, and now that the cruiserweight era is over, the developers have added a bit of a course correction for future content. I expect that the timing of this balance change was calculated. They didn't want to mess with it while Sugar Riot was part of the current tier, but they determined that Viper was just a bit too strong compared to other jobs in those phases, and wanted to, like above, ensure there's some level of equality amongst the role. It's somewhere around a 7 to 8% damage nerf on AoE depending on the number of targets you're attacking, so actually a fairly substantial reeling back for Dawntrail's new melee edition. Every physical range DPS have gotten a small damage buff as well. Machinist is gaining about 520 potency every 2 minutes, Bard about 500 give or take based on their level of gameplay, and Dancer roughly 300, so Machinist and Bard are getting slightly more of a buff compared to Dancer, but that makes sense. Dancer is a very valuable job right now, especially in pre-made groups because of how well it scales with raid buffs and plays into competency, and in those situations, it is undeniable. It doesn't need as much as, say, Machinist does. Do I think these changes are good? Yes. Do I think these changes are anything close to what the role needs? No. Physical range changes are always going to be a huge eye roll for me until their place within FF14's landscape is reconsidered. Right now, they are the 5% role, the stopgap, and the fact that Cruiserweight Party Finder was rough in waiting for them has shown that in the raiding scene people would just much prefer being on a job that they feel that they're able to directly contribute to success more directly on. So sure, it's nice I guess, but nothing can really interest me about this role until I see what we can expect from them in 8.0. I don't need job reworks as such, more of a role identity rework with the currently existing jobs existing within that. The only caster that got changes is Red Mage, and these two are quite big. So the tooltip is a bunch of mumbo jumbo, so here's what basically happened. Now when you press Manification, you get the ability to use your next melee combos from ranged distances. You no longer need to actually be in melee range to use melee combo for the next 30 seconds. All other melee combos act as normal, it's just the post-Manification ones that are subject to this. You no longer get that 5% damage buff you used to either, that has been removed, and the Prefulgence proc can now be used immediately instead of needing to consume the 6 stacks that previously existed in order to access it. To ensure this doesn't result in a nerf, Embolden's personal buff has been increased from 5% to 10%. They basically just moved the buff from Manification over to Embolden. But this does act as a buff overall rather than just a reshuffling, to make that clear. Red Mage is probably getting just shy of a 1% damage buff from all this. So this is another example, just like Gunbreaker, of a change that you'll either love or hate. Red Mage players have famously had grievances with their 2-minute windows in Raid. As the only caster that necessitates a partial melee range burst, sometimes when fight or strat constraints force the caster away from the boss, they can be especially singled out for being put in a hard situation, which I understand doesn't feel the best. With that said, my personal take is I always found working around those situations an interesting, unique challenge to tackle that only Red Mage had, and I found that a positive. I would get to play with a tight timing or pull off a cool move, and that made me feel good when I did it right. For those in the same boat as me, these changes feel like a dumbing down of a job that already flowed naturally. Those that don't want to deal with such friction will see this as a big win, and I think that's totally fine too. On the healer front, shield healers Sage and Scholar got a small potency buff to their damage over time ticks, clearly in an effort to combat the unstoppable force that is Astro's raid DPS. For said god, Collective Unconscious has received a buff to its duration that makes its damage mitigation last 10 seconds instead of 5, making it easier to use and more able to gain value on multi-hit attacks. White Mage, however, has received far more widespread changes. Firstly, it got a potency buff to Glare, as well as one to Afflatus Misery, in order to compensate for that Glare buff and keep it DPS neutral overall to use. Plenary Indulgence has been buffed as well. Now, when you press it, you get a 10% damage mitigation for 10 seconds as well. That's right, the exact same amount and duration as the damage mitigation 60-second cooldown with Collective Unconscious. So this is a huge buff, clearly. White Mage has been thirsting for more mitigation to bring them closer to their direct rival in that regard, and getting it is good. I just wish it hadn't been attached to Plenary Indulgence personally. Now, instead of having its unique use case where you would pair it with an incoming Rapture, or if you tried really hard, line it up perfectly and cover and buff two of them, now you'll use it almost exclusively as a mitigation button in the exact same spots as you would use Collective on Astro. It makes things easier to memorize, and it is a job buff, but an ability that before today had a unique use case now no longer has one. That's one of my main gripes with FF14 job design. Cool interactions that make a battle feel unique on one job being stripped away in favour of uniformity or ease of play. It's not like White Mage has a lot of buttons, just add a new one for it, or make Plenary a combo action off of it that you can hold for 30 seconds or something, at least giving you more choice in how you utilise that heal vamp. The biggest change of all though is one to the gauge. Now you get Misery pre-pull as well as 3 Lily charges. White Mage's ramp up is gone, and so too is their requirement to carefully manage their Lily stacks in most cases. I think that's a shame, as it was a part of the job I really enjoyed doing. Having an excess does harm that interaction, but I can see it bringing more unique situations in downtime where you can come out swinging with a bonus Misery earlier than you'd think normally. It's also definitely impactful on 2 targets or more, and will likely change your opener on trash mobs and multi-target raids, though I can't see it doing much in single target scenarios. Without having spent any time doing the math yet, my immediate feeling is that the insane gamba you'd have to play to gain anything from a double Misery opener on single target, considering that you have to spend at least 1 Rapture inside of buffs and delay your dot to do it, is almost certainly not worth it at all for general play. It's a bit of a monkey's paw for me, I guess. It got stronger, which I want, but not in a way that I personally would have liked. So those are all the job changes, and it's here that I have to make a segue into a related topic. Up front, I don't like complaining or being negative, and I've really enjoyed 7.4's content so far. Actually, it's peak. But here feels like a good place to voice this concern. These job changes do not spark confidence in me. I have long stated that I believe the single largest issue in terms of gameplay engagement in FF14 is job design. Their baseline simplicity is fine, and their streamlining is acceptable as long as there are still interesting avenues for expression. But those are dwindling constantly and never sparking up elsewhere seemingly. You go through a tunnel when you play this game of experience. You'll start out new, and everything will be great and shiny, but after an expansion or two, the jobs will begin to feel rote if they're simple, uniform, and completely unchanging. It leads to stagnation and the most painful issue of all for a live service game, being too easily solved. FF14 has been a solved game for quite a while. Changes to ensure that it is more easily solved, and making changes to ensure that it is even more easily solved does not speak to me as a positive. You have to play jobs in everything, and interesting jobs means that everything gets more interesting for everyone. The 7.4 changes are in the exact same vein as all the other dawntrail job changes. They make jobs super balanced, remove as much friction as possible, make them as newcomer friendly as possible, ensure they are fairly uniform in terms of priorities and thought processes. Your pick must have a similar level of efficacy regardless of fight requirement. Freedom of choice at the job select screen is important, but right now it is being prioritized at the cost of moment-to-moment decision making. There needs to be some kind of balance, a middle ground that can serve both purposes. I don't even think it would be hard to achieve either. I'm saying all of this because we have directly heard talk from Yoshida that 8.0 will see some kind of shift in the job landscape, though in which direction that will be and what form it will take, we are yet to know. I guess for me, if they continue trending in this direction, I can see more long-term players leave, and even for myself, I know it will hurt my eagerness to log in. Dawntrail as an expansion, content-wise, has been carried hard by Fight Designer Endgame, but I believe that if the jobs had that now dulled spark, that they wouldn't have to work so hard to stand out. It's not the end of the world, but honestly, seeing preventing potential stress constantly being used as a reason by the developers for removing flair in favour of uniformity, even as recently as literally this patch, it just feels bad. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please do consider supporting my Patreon or becoming a member like these fine folks. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.